Chapter 125, The Past, Antony's POV. As soon as Hilaria twittered away on whatever errands occupied someone so damnably cheerful, Theo turned to stare at Antony with wide eyes. "He didn't like the book, did he?" she asked anxiously, all but wringing her hands. Antony signed back, too stressed himself to be anything but honest. "No." "Why didn't you warn me?" demanded Theo. "You said to get any book. You never said you had books that were so violent." "The second half, where Yosuke is at court, is wonderful," Antony defended himself. "The author has a wonderful grasp of political foolishness and maneuvering." Theodora just groaned, slumping onto the edge of the bed. "Well, I cocked that up. I hope Kenta does a better job of making him feel better." "It's not your fault," Antony signed. Misery dragged his shoulders down into a slump. "I ruined everything, Theo. I kissed him. That's why he's upset." Her heavy brows shot up. "Really? I thought he was always after you to kiss him." "That was before." Antony moaned a little as he signed. "And it was a really bad kiss. I mostly missed his mouth, and then I fainted in his lap." "Oh." Her brows climbed higher yet. "That is pretty bad." It was good to have an honest best friend, but sometimes Antony could have done with a little kindly lying. He groaned again, letting the mortification wash over him. Seeming to realize how blunt she'd been, Theo leaned over and patted his knee, one of the only unbandaged parts of his body. "I doubt he minded about the bad aim or the fainting. He knows what bad shape you're in. He wouldn't blame you for that." "It's not about whether he blames me." Antony was signing so furiously that he inadvertently jabbed himself in the chest and gasped at the sharp pain that followed before continuing. "It's about how I upset him. How would you feel if you got pawed at by a hideous monster? He must be so disgusted. What if he thinks I'll try it again? What if he doesn't feel safe in his own bed anymore?" He stopped himself before he could sign. "What if he wants to leave me?" It would be exactly the punishment Antony deserved for his years of neglect. He'd ignored the men who lived with him, not caring whether they were there or not. Now there was a man whose presence Antony craved like a drug. If he were to walk away and leave Antony lonely and yearning, it would be just poetic enough to make a fable writer proud. Theo shook her head. "I don't think he feels that way about you, but if you're worried, you should ask him." Trust Theo to make Antony feel like an utter fool in fewer than 10 words. He tried, damn it! He poured himself out on the inadequate little tablet, trying to assuage the fears Hanyu sobbed out one after the other, but it just couldn't be done in such tiny space constraints. Antony had the unpleasant sensation that he wouldn't truly be able to resolve things with the young man until he could speak again. He wiggled the healing stump in his mouth and willed it to grow faster. What a luxury it would be to talk, to pour out words without limit or constraint. When he could speak again, he would find out every last thing that was upsetting Hanyu and do his level best to get rid of them all. He would make his feelings and longings understood while making it clear that Hanyu had full choice in the matter. He would... Best not to get ahead of himself. Antony's record with verbal communication was hardly flawless. He would probably fuck it up as badly as he did everything else. "Maybe," he signed. Theo accepted his evasiveness and dropped the subject. Antony would have been grateful for that if it hadn't been for the new topic she took up in its place. "I'm sorry to press you about Marcus, but I need to know what you want to do with him," she said softly, making Antony's whole body flash cold and rigid as stone. "The winds are good, and I'd like to set sail soon, but that would close off any possibility of sending him with Mishima. Is that what you want to do?" The thought was tempting. Antony could just shuffle the problem of Marcus off onto somebody else. He would never have to see him again, and as much as the idea pained and panicked him, he knew that seeing his ex-lover and speaking to him would be much, much worse. He could be rid of Marcus forever without any public trials or private confrontations. It could be easy. And we all know how I like things to be easy. Edgy and Zenji and all the others could say a lot about how much I value making things easy for myself. Perhaps if it had been Claudia's ship docked next to theirs, Antony would have done it. Claudia could keep Marcus under control and protect the humans of her ship as Antony had failed to do. But Masima, who had spoken so casually of their slaughters and only agreed to Felix's census with visible reluctance? No, Antony sighed miserably. That won't work. You're not going to let him go here, are you? Theo asked uneasily. I know he's your lover, but Antony, it's not safe. He's not my lover anymore. Now he'd told 3 people. I ended it. Theo gasped, eyes widening. You did? Of course I did. Antony braced himself for the I told you so. After what he tried to do to Hanyu, after what he did do to Asao, and you. Far from looking triumphant, Theo's face had turned suddenly grim. What he did to you was awful and you didn't deserve it, right? It was excessive, Antony allowed, but I can hardly pretend I was innocent in all this. Theo scowled. You protected the humans from him and he beat you to a pulp because of it. I don't see how that puts you at fault. I set him off, Antony explained. I already told you about that on the boat, Theo. Yes, you spouted all kinds of bullshit on the boat, snapped Theo. And I told you why it was bullshit, and then you found Marcus amusing himself by torturing, maiming, and trying to murder innocent, helpless men. And when you stopped him, he broke your fucking sternum. So forgive me for assuming that you would have quit making excuses for him. Do you want me to say you were right? Antony sighed, frustration boiling up until he wished he could yell. You were! Marcus doesn't care about humans' lives at all, and I'm a blithering idiot for falling in love with him. Hey, a note of concern tinged her voice now. I never said that, Antony. You don't have to. Antony's hands were shaking a little, making his sign sloppy, but he pushed ahead. It's obvious. I'm an idiot. Theo shook her head. You're not. You were in love, and he used that to manipulate you. It's happened to better people than us, Antony. Stop talking like I'm the victim! Antony couldn't even look at her. I let him get away with murder, literally, for centuries. When I first met Asao, I assumed Marcus was going to kill him within 6 years. It felt inevitable. And I didn't snatch him away that instant or break it off with Marcus or even give it any real thought. I was just a little bit annoyed. There's no excuse for that. No wonder Hanyu hates me now. I'm not a thing worth forgiving. Big, calloused hands closed gently over his fingers, effectively shutting him up. Antony was horrified to realize he'd begun to cry, fast, furious tears striping his cheeks and blurring his vision. That's part of the story, Theo acknowledged softly. A true part. I'm not here to lie or make excuses. You know I don't do that. But if I'm not making excuses for you, that means I'm also not making excuses for me or Felix or the rest of us. We all knew he was dangerous, and we let him take a human every 6 years anyway. We thought he was too hungry and careless instead of being a sadistic fucking torturer. But I'm finding that distinction less and less important the more I think about it. We should have stormed his room and taken those men away from him, and we didn't. We're all to blame. Antony yanked his hands free. You're not in charge. I am. It was my job to stop him. You can't blame yourself for not doing my job. I damn well can, Theo retorted. Yes, you're the lord of the ship, but he was hurting you, Antony. He had you under his thumb and afraid to go against him. Hanyu told me what happened after you gave Gyuri to me. Any little defiance, and Marcus punished you brutally. After a few years of that, I think just about any of us would have been in a better position to stop him than you were. Everything inside Antony rebelled at the idea of equating his fights with Marcus to the torture and death of his ex-lover's attendants. Antony had always had the option to walk away and the capacity to defend himself. Any injuries he might have sustained were temporary. There was simply no comparison. He shook his head, ignoring the pain of the movement. It's not an excuse, Theo allowed with a sigh, but it's important. I meant what I said about all your wallowing, Antony. You're not helping anyone by hating yourself. There's blame to go around. Most of it goes to Marcus, and some to all the rest of us. You act like it's all on you, and you should be dropped in a hole so we can get rid of the problem. That's not how it works. Antony didn't argue. He was suddenly exhausted, and he didn't want to talk about this anymore. Antony? Her voice had gotten even gentler. On the boat, you said that you had gotten us cursed. Oh, no. Did you... Theo's voice wobbled. Was she crying too? He couldn't risk looking at her face to check. Did you think I blamed you? All these years? That we all did? Of course you blame me. The shaking had gotten worse, and Antony cursed his stupid, useless hands. It was my fault. Oh, gods, Antony, no. She squeezed his knee again, and he wanted to recoil from the touch. You married someone wonderful who you were madly in love with. How could you have known that they would curse you for that? Of course I knew there would be consequences, Antony sighed miserably. People suffer for making unwise marriages all the time. It's half the story of politics. I knew it was reckless and there would be a price to pay, and I did it anyway. I was arrogant enough to think I could protect Val from the worst of it, and so selfish and blind that I never thought that anyone else was even at risk. That wasn't you being blind, Theo said firmly. That was my aunt and your father being stupid. It was madness for them to try to lay a curse on all your followers when they didn't know the exact number, especially since it was such a dangerous curse. Sometimes I think about what could have happened if Claudia hadn't already been preparing to flee. If she hadn't called us all to the docks, it would have been even more of a bloodbath. The court enchanters were probably dead, and who else could have stopped us? We might have killed everyone. They were reckless. How could you have predicted that? It's not that I should have predicted that they would turn us into vampires. Antony let out a grunt of frustration between finger motions. But I should have known I was putting everyone in danger. I should have known I couldn't protect him. I've never been able to protect anyone. He didn't sign the words, but he suspected that Theo knew what he was thinking anyway. It was unbearable to have someone know him so long and deeply. Antony continued moving his hands. He was worried about getting married. He thought the king would punish me for marrying a human servant, and he was right, but I talked him into it, and then he married me, and I killed him and ruined everybody's lives forever. Then we found an island of innocent people and ruined that too. Everything's so broken, and I don't know how to even start fixing it. And it all started when I tried to take more happiness from the world than I deserved, instead of listening to the best person I knew. Theo was quiet for a long time. Antony began to hope that she would leave. Instead, she finally broke the silence. Val loved being married to you, you know, she said softly. I visited a few days before the curse. He was glowing. I always thought that was a stupid metaphor until I saw him that day. He was so happy, the air around him practically shone. Something very old and very sharp twisted in the depths of Antony's gut. He wanted to beg Theo to stop, beg her for mercy, but he was frozen in place, trembling. He said you were off for the day, supervising the builders and probably getting in their way, Theo continued, pitiless. He said you were obsessed with making everything perfect for him, that you sat in a field all night so you could make a note of exactly how and where the light broke over the mountain, because he liked to be woken by the sunrise, and you wanted to make sure to put your bedroom window in just the right place. He said that you were making an incredible fuss and driving everybody mad, and he'd never felt so loved. Valerius had never woken to the sunrise through that window. The house had been almost ready when the curse was laid. Antony had wondered about it ever since, though he tried not to. Who had lived there? Did the king gift it to some sycophant or other? Or had it stayed empty, weeds choking the dog run and bats nesting in the greenhouse? Had it rotted away without leaving a single trace of all the care and dreams that had once been poured into it? The tears were coursing faster than ever down Antony's cheeks. They splashed onto Theo's hands where it held his knee, but she didn't stop. He said he was an orphan, and his lord had trained him as a gardener, and then sent him to the king as a gift, and the king had shuffled him along to his concubine. She was almost whispering now, and Antony was quite sure that she was crying too. I was honored that he told me all that. I'd wondered about his family and why I'd never met them. We talked about being orphans and being passed around by more powerful people like dishes at a feast. And we talked about how good it felt to be adopted and loved by you, Antony. How fierce and giving your love was, and how you could make someone with no family feel like they had one at last. You made your husband so fucking happy. It's not your fault that the king and consort decided to ruin that. Please stop. Please stop. Antony couldn't bear to hear this. It hurt worse than his shattered bones. He didn't deserve it. He wasn't the man Valerius had loved, not anymore, and he had no excuse for the man he'd become, and that man didn't even deserve to hope that he had ever done right by anyone. It would have broken Val's heart to see you lavishing all that love on someone who treated you so badly, Theo sniffled. But Hanyu? I think he would like Hanyu a lot, and he'd be so proud of you for standing up to Marcus to protect him. Let's start thinking of some other things we could do to make him proud of us. She didn't speak again, but she didn't leave either. She just sat there as Antony sobbed and eventually slept.